Hi, I'm Kesenya, and thanks for joining me for this week's Astro Weather Report. I'm your Astro Weather Girl, and it's lovely to be with you for this rather interesting week that we're embarking on astrologically. I will just mention that if you haven't encountered this before, I am running a Facebook and Instagram page associated with my work here. Every day during the week, I pull a daily oracle card for encouragement and guidance, which is something I've really got heavily into during this more difficult period of our lives, 2020. And so hopefully it's my prayer, my goal with this to perhaps provide some level of inspiration for myself and for everybody through this Instagram and Facebook page with a daily oracle card that I pull from a number of different decks. So if you're interested in that sort of thing and seeing what message spirit might have for you each day, then do jump along there. The links are in the description below to my Insta page or Facebook page, whatever you prefer. But I hope to see you there. Now, one of the reasons this week is so interesting is that we are going to be having so many planets moving retrograde from this point onwards. We're really starting to enter into what's going to be a very big retrograde season. So that all begins, well, it started last week with Pluto. We've got Saturn already retrograding. I'll talk more about that shortly. But we've got Venus going retrograde on the 13th and then Jupiter going retrograde on the 14th. Oh my goodness, such a big week. Now, that is actually why Venus's retrograde period, that's why I'm dressed in green today and wearing a dress with pretty flowers on it, the colors of nature and symbolisms of nature. Plus, I'm also, for the duration of Venus retrograde season, I'm intending to wear this rose quartz bracelet. Rose quartz is associated with the energy of Venus. And it's a good time during Venus retrograde season to channel more Venusian energy into your life to try and buoy up what might be dissipating or lacking during this season. Now, I've chosen rose quartz. You might find other things. Green is the color of Venus, natural things, flowers, butterflies, trees, forests, beautiful natural things are very Venusian, because Venus has a connection with nature. So I'm trying to bring more Venusian energy into my life during this Venus retrograde season. You might find ways of doing that in your life as well. I will also just let you know I'm not going to be talking about Venus retrograde this week, even though she does go retrograde on the 13th of May. And quite simply, that's because I've done an extensive video looking at this phenomenon, and Venus goes retrograde the most rarely of all the planets. So this is a rare transit, and therefore when things are rarer, they're more influential. So do check out my link. I'll hopefully put it in the little box up here, a link to my video all about Venus in her retrograde motion and what it means for all signs. You can jump into that and check that out there. But the other retrograde planets of importance this week, as I've said, not Venus, she is one, but Saturn and Jupiter, the two big interpersonal planets, Jupiter and Saturn. They sit between the very personal planets, which are the Sun, the Moon, Mercury, Venus, and Mars. They're very influential on our daily lives here on Earth, and their transits and so forth we notice and feel and so on. But the big whammies are Jupiter and Saturn, because they are slower than the little zippy ones that whiz around the sun a lot quicker because they're closer into the sun. Jupiter and Saturn move slower, their energies have greater time to build, and they are therefore more powerful in their influence on us. Not only that, but they're the final two planets that we can see with the naked eye. In fact, Jupiter was particularly striking last night, rising just after the moon, which is still quite full. And it has this beautiful, you probably won't see it tonight or the next night in the same capacity as it was last night, but it's very, very striking and beautiful when it rises at the moment, Jupiter. Now, we see these planets with the naked eye, Saturn and Jupiter, we can see them with the naked eye, but beyond Saturn and Jupiter, we actually move into the zone that requires a telescope. You probably heard me talking a lot about this. I am quite intrigued by the influence of the planets based upon as above, so below, the Hermetic principle, which has to do with what you can see in the sky is reflected in our lives below. And when we can't see Neptune, Uranus, and Pluto without a telescope, therefore it corresponds to our inward self, our inner psyche, and our inner experiences. We do feel the shifts within us with those planets as they transit through the sky. And then our inward shifts usually cause outward change to occur in our life. So they do impact our external lives, our third dimensional reality, but it's usually in response to an internal shift that happens within us. But that's the external planets. We've got the close little ones, Mercury and Mars and so on, nice and close to Earth, so their influence is quite regular and we feel their cycles. But then the big gung-ho changes in our earthly reality come from usually a transit of Jupiter or Saturn because of their slow-moving energy and because of their distance from the Earth that allows that energy to build up and then impact us quite strongly. So that said, what does it mean when we have these two retrograde? Saturn went retrograde on the 11th of May. Just had to check my notes, make sure I wasn't going to get confused there. And Jupiter is retrograde on the 14th of May. So we're in this retrograde season, and this retrograde season is going to last until September for both of these two influential planets. What's it going to bring us? Well, when a planet goes retrograde, it wants to take something back. It's revisiting. It's going to our eyes on Earth. It looks like it's going backwards in the sky. And therefore, it's going back over some previous lesson or something we haven't quite grasped, or some piece of our soul or our psyche that we need to improve upon, or some experience we haven't quite learnt the lessons from yet and we need to go back over and revisit. Jupiter and Saturn are now calling us to take something back into our lives based on the nature of their energy. So what might that mean? Well, let's use Venus for example. When Venus is going retrograde, we're being asked to revisit, to take something back, to go over and redo anything to do with love, money, finances, resources, anything to do with self-worth and self-valuing. And we are called to explore those themes again, to learn new lessons and to up-level and grow. And with Saturn and with Jupiter, the same thing. With Jupiter, well, we're going to be revisiting issues of wealth, issues of prosperity, issues of abundance in our lives personally and also on the collective as well. We'll be revisiting these things. We'll be looking at belief and spirituality. What are our belief systems? What is our morality as an individual, as a collective? We revisit those. We learn to take something back into our lives from, the past that we've missed before. Jupiter is also joy. Jupiter is also our happiness is seen from Jupiter. So we're going to learn to take back our happiness now, take back our joy, or see where we've missed an opportunity for joy or missed an opportunity for happiness through Jupiter retrograde season. When we have Jupiter retrograde in the natal chart, it can indicate that in some previous lives we've missed an opportunity for abundance, for joy and happiness, for belief and spiritual integration. And now, if we've got Jupiter retrograde in the natal chart, we're being called to integrate that into our current life experience. It mightn't be easy to do so, but it's part of the calling. Saturn retrograde is asking us to take back things regarding Saturn lessons. And what are Saturn lessons? Discipline, boundaries, limits, setting appropriate limits, having an appropriate sense of authority over our own lives or in society. So what we can see there is a need to set, we realize we need to set, new boundaries, or realize what the rules are, or realize, where we need to enact more discipline in our personal lives. Now, the lessons, the way these planets teach these lessons that we need to revisit and reintegrate can be challenging. We're going to cover that in a minute. But before I get into the philosophical side of this, I just want to point out the astronomical effects of what is going on. Essentially, we start to see Jupiter and Saturn and all the planets beyond Jupiter and Saturn actually going retrograde once the Sun reaches a trinal point from their position. So what I mean by that is, here's the Sun down here in the sign of Taurus right now. And it's making a trine aspect, as you can see, to these planets up here in the latter degrees of Capricorn. Once the Sun gets to a position of trining any of the outer planets, it will make it look to us here on Earth like these outer planets are going backwards. There's Saturn, there's Jupiter. That's the moon there this week. And of course, this trinal effect, this retrograde effect lasts until the Sun is around in roughly the sign of Virgo. And then it will be, let's just draw a dot there representing the Sun. When the Sun is in the latter degrees of Virgo and it is trining this these placements of Jupiter and Saturn again, then it will look like they are turning direct. That's going to happen in September. Obviously, the Sun is in the sign of Virgo in September, and that's when the planets will go direct. But while the Sun is traveling opposite these two here, you can see that Sun over the next few months is going to be moving through the last degrees of Taurus, through Gemini, through Cancer, through Leo, and then into Virgo. That is when we have the retrograde period of the outer planets, when the Sun is sitting opposite. And it lasts from the trinal position here to the next trinal position. So I hope that's making astronomical sense to you, why or how we observe this in the sky. When the Sun is opposite the planets, then they will appear retrograde. Now, fairly soon too, when the Sun moves into Cancer, we're going to see that happening with Neptune, who's also going to look like he's going retrograde in the sky for a certain portion of this year as well. So, but that's not obviously happening just yet because Sun's not in trinal aspect to Neptune nor Uranus right now either. So that's what we see with this astronomical effect. Now, obviously, this then means that Saturn is retrograde for about 5 months of the year for him, and 4 months of each year, roughly, we see Jupiter in a retrograde motion because of this influence. So I just wanted to cover the astronomy of how this works, just so everybody is on par with that. But Jupiter retrograde, let's start with Jupiter retrograde. Well, as I've just explained, we're going to be having a trine from the Sun to Jupiter retrograde when this begins. And this is actually a beautiful influence. Jupiter trine Sun, what a lovely energy to be under. This indicates that this Jupiter retrograde period is going to be full of growth, full of joy, full of opportunity. Of course, that happens in every Jupiter retrograde season because we begin with usually a trine from the Sun, but it's quite a tight aspect this time around. So there's growth that is available to us through Jupiter retrograde season, joy, opportunity, happiness, the good things that happen under a Jupiter trine to Sun. And if you've got Jupiter trine Sun in your natal chart, then you'll be familiar with how this energy plays out in your personal life, and you're going to get more of it. In fact, we're all going to get more of it under this influence. Now, what this means is that let's have a look at Jupiter retrograde for a start. If you've got Jupiter retrograde in the natal chart, and indeed during Jupiter retrograde season, it means that the material things of life can be not quite as satisfying for us. And certainly if you've got Jupiter retrograde natally, it can indicate that in life, material things are fun, and it's great to have a nice car, and it's lovely to have a nice house, and but unless there's a spiritual component to your life, unless there's depth and philosophical worldview and an expansion of the mind and the soul and the spirit, life will seem unsatisfying if you have Jupiter retrograde in the natal chart. It's like the inner qualities of Jupiter actually take on greater importance than the external things that we all like to get from Jupiter, luck and prosperity and abundance. It's the internal workings of Jupiter that actually have greater value in the natal chart if you've got Jupiter retrograde. But during Jupiter retrograde season, this also comes into play, where we are now as a collective and as individuals going to be more concerned with what's meaningful to me. What's my moral stance on things now? What is my belief system? We're going to be reviewing this. Remember, a retrograde planet is to take something back. So we will review what are my beliefs about life and humanity and authority systems. Jupiter retrograde in Capricorn, what's my belief about authority systems? We'll be reviewing it. Where have we stood with this belief about hierarchical structures and their influence over humanity and over me as an individual? We'll be looking at all this sort of thing. And the material accomplishments of life or the material experiences of life are going to become less important during this period as we look at, well, what do I really believe? What's important morally now? What is important faith-wise, spiritually wise, philosophically wise? What we start to value those things over and above material resources. Don't get me wrong. Everybody likes to have nice material resources, but it's our inner experience of these things that's actually going to take precedence during Jupiter retrograde period. And what also happens during Jupiter retrograde is there is an ability to big picture it, to look beyond external things, to see beyond, beyond your hand, so to speak. Anything external, it's like now under Jupiter retrograde, we can get the big picture of what is really going on. We finally see beyond. I keep thinking of the virus examples, but I don't want to use any of those. We might see beyond the fact that we've all been in lockdown and start to see what it's taught us, what it's brung us, the expansion of our worldview and our mindset and our understanding of humanity that's occurred because of this external experience that we've all been through. So that's an associated example that pops into my head. We're now going to be looking at what is the bigger meaning of things, what is the greater influence of things, what's the bigger impact of our little experiences that we have day to day and month to month and so on. So this is a chance for some really big picture thinking to occur in our lives as a collective under this influence. Now, also, one thing I love about Jupiter retrograde, and Jupiter is retrograde in my chart, and I really love this because it's a beautiful personal message to anyone who has Jupiter retrograde in their natal chart. It's the energy of alchemy. Now, I'm not saying everyone who's got Jupiter retrograde is an alchemist, but it is there. The potential is there for alchemy. Essentially, Jupiter retrograde gives the capacity to restore things to life. What a beautiful, inspirational kind of message Jupiter retrograde has. Jupiter retrograde is the ability to pull yourself up by the bootstraps, to lift yourself out of the muck and the mire, to create a life that's like the lotus blossom emerging out of the mud, so to speak. So Jupiter is this alchemical, turning lead into gold kind of energy when Jupiter is retrograde. Restoring things to life. And my God, don't we all need this on the planet right now? The chance to restore this planet to life. Now, yes, we've seen beautiful things happen through the recent slowing of life and great pause and switching off of the machine, if you want to call it that. We've seen beautiful things happening where the planet has been restored to life. The beautiful canals of Venice, gorgeous now. We can see the Himalayas in India, and there's no smog clouding that beautiful picture. We're seeing the planet sort of breathing again and coming to life again. And it's my belief that under this Jupiter influence of retrograde that we might continue to see more alchemy, personally, individually, and in the greater context of the human experience. At least that's my hope for Jupiter retrograde period. We might see families restored to life because people have now got a big picture idea of what it means to be family. You know, here in Australia, we have the AFL, the Australian Football League, and it's been shut down for this year. There's no season this year. First time that has ever happened. And what have I noticed? Every time I go for a Saturday walk, there's dads out with their children everywhere. You know, they're taking their kids for a ride or a walk or to get an ice cream or something like that. They're actually out in nature. And I'm like, this is actually really good. They're not sitting at home in front of the TV with the remote watching football. They are appreciating and interacting with their families. Oh, I love it. I absolutely love it. So we are going to now see the returning to life, or the restoration to life, if you like, of families, of new work practices, or new big picture perspectives of what do I want out of this job that I have? Is this really my spiritual calling now? Is this really what what I'm all about? And we see the big picture perspective about family, work, play, creativity, spirituality, and we start to restore to life all these facets of who we are as human beings. Particularly now, I believe, because we've been able to stop and review and think, hang on a minute. When we're busy, when we're running with the busyness and the hecticness of life, we don't get time to actually review these things. We're just so busy trying to pay the bills and do. And this has been, in some senses, I feel, a gift for us to be able to go Jupiter retrograde energy, and look at the big picture. What is the truth here? What is the real life that I want to live now? And how can I restore this to life in my experience? Jupiter retrograde is going to bring us to that point, and I love this. I'm excited by this Jupiter retrograde period. Saturn retrograde is a little different. Naturally, these planets are like night and day, like the yin yang. They're very, very different, but they have a beautiful purpose to play out in each of our lives, actually. Neither is negative, neither is bad, neither is good. They are just what they are. It's like the yin yang symbol. Both have a beauty to offer. So Saturn is turning retrograde in a very close conjunction with the fixed star Alatar. And I hope I'm saying that right. I do have trouble with these ancient names of the fixed stars and my hopeless Australian pronunciation of things. But Alatar is quite an interesting star. It is a star of leadership. It falls into that category with a group of stars that are all stars of leadership. Regulus is one of those. Alatar is also a star of leadership, but it's a star of leadership that's connected to higher powers. So here is the planet of authority and discipline and rules and structures turning retrograde on the star of higher powers. You can take this in a number of different ways, but what I feel this message is for humanity is that higher powers are going to be involved in what is occurring on Earth over the next few months. They're going to hold space for us, to use that cliche. They're going to hold space for us because Saturn is connected to our Earth dimensional reality. As I said in the intro here, Saturn is the final planet that you can see with the naked eye. After that, you need a telescope to see Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. And therefore, Saturn has a connection to the overall earthly experience, the tangible reality of life on planet Earth. It's very influential upon us and our experiences and the events of life on Earth. You really have to pay attention to Saturn because he's just that important. Here is this very important planet about karma and about our earthly events, turning retrograde on Alatar, the star of connection to higher powers. Now, what higher powers? I leave that up to you to sort of tune into your higher self and your instinct and sort of come to a conclusion about that with. But I choose to align, very Jupiterian of me, I know, with the idea of divine, angelic higher powers watching over everything that's happening on planet Earth right now. As I said, holding space for things and stepping in when needed to progress humanity to where it needs to be, according to the destiny of planet Earth. So it is interesting times. There's no doubt about it. 2020 has been a year like no other. We will talk about this for the rest of our lives when this is over. But here is this very influential planet under this quite incredible year, turning retrograde and connecting with higher powers. So I am hoping it's bringing blessing here, and certainly from the channeling experiences I've had lately and the future reading that I have done for people who had progressions and so forth, I believe that it's going to take us forward in a very protected and guarded way by the angels, by the divine, by entities and powers that are at a higher level than our own vibrational level here. But let's move on from my spiritualist style or my mystical style here, and we want to have a look at what Saturn retrograding actually brings. Well, when Saturn retrogrades, if you've got Saturn retrograde in your natal chart, it's a challenging one. Jupiter retrograde, not so bad in the natal chart, in fact, quite good. But Saturn retrograde in the natal chart brings an inability to know what the limits are, and a challenge in being able to set boundaries for yourself and say enough's enough. There's difficulty in having discipline. Sometimes, we can either take it to an extreme with a Saturn retrograde in the natal chart where we're just so super disciplined that there's no room for fun, no room for spontaneity, or we are so undisciplined that nothing ever gets done. We allow people to tread all over us, or there's no boundaries. Discipline and boundaries are very much the energies of Saturn, and we need boundaries. We need discipline in our life. And when it's lacking in a Jupiter retrograde chart, then we struggle naturally. We need boundaries. We need discipline to a certain degree. If there's too many boundaries, if there's too much discipline, then you live life like this, afraid to make a move, afraid to take the next step, afraid to do anything because the boundaries and restrictions and limitations on you are just out of control. So it can go either way. But the retrograde means that the boundaries and the discipline are at a real, difficult energetic level for you. So Saturn retrograde means that this might be the case now. There might be a lessening of restrictions and regulations, rules and boundaries, but it could go too far where we're not allowing the appropriate boundaries in place, and then we suffer the consequences through something. Or it could mean that the boundaries and restrictions become suffocating, become so overwhelming under this influence that it's hard to live a free, abundant life. There's a lack of appropriate, that's the word to underline there, there's a lack of appropriate limits. Lack of discipline that's appropriate through, again, at the moment, Saturn's in Aquarius, but it will be retrograding back into Capricorn, which is hierarchical structures and government organizations and things. So we could be feeling it from those organizations once again. They might be pretty vague about the boundaries, these government organizations under Saturn retrograde. Or we can actually be doing this to ourselves, where we're vague about what the limits are, what the boundaries are in our own personal life. So, for example, you're dating someone and they just have kept sort of stepping over the mark, and then Saturn goes retrograde, and prior to that, you've been able to say, enough's enough, stop nicking wine out of my cupboard, or stop, making yourself at home in my place because, I don't like that. You're able to put boundaries in place when Saturn's going direct, but when it goes retrograde, suddenly these people might see you as limitless and suck from you and draw from you to the point where you're, overextended and exhausted and have nothing left to give because you haven't been able to put the necessary boundaries in place. Saturn retrograde energy. So that's how this can play out in your personal life with many areas, not just love relationships or not just friendships and things where people are taking the wine out of your fridge. But Saturn is also about our work and our career and our social status and our social success and our authority. And so when Saturn goes retrograde, we might find that we aren't quite as engaged any longer with our career. We aren't quite as into that social status that meant so much to us even just a month ago. It's no longer important because we lose that sense of, what our boundaries are, what our, how much we can achieve and what we want to achieve. And so we can end up not liking our work or not liking the current level of status that we have achieved. It mightn't fulfill us. We might be disillusioned with it in some way. We can even get a bit depressed about work under Saturn retrograde period. Now, that could be coming because of all the societal influence right now where our jobs are a bit precarious, where our traditional forms of employment have gone through so much upheaval. We don't know what the new rules and regulations are. Saturn retrograde. We don't know what the new parameters are. We don't know what the new expectations are or the boundaries are in regard to career and our work and our ability to achieve social status. Saturn energy. So these are the things that we can experience now under a Saturn retrograde influence collectively and personally. But it's so important to keep in mind that these two very polaric energies are occurring at the same time. Jupiter is retrograde until September 12th. Saturn is retrograde until September the 29th. So they're starting this off together pretty much in the same week, and they're going to wrap it all up, this energy up, in the same month, not the same week or anything, but in the same month. So we're under the influence of these two together at the same time. So we've got to look at this now in the context of this happening together. And back to the astrology again, just to jump around a bit and get you all confused. It's a very rare occurrence that we see the retrograde period happening with Jupiter and Saturn at the same time, beginning at the same time especially, because ordinarily we don't find these two sitting so close together in the chart. The great conjunction only occurs, every sort of 20 years or so. So most of the time we'll say, like, Jupiter will be down, let's use an example here. Jupiter will be, sorry about that, further off. And say Jupiter's in Aries and Saturn's in Aquarius. Well, the Sun, as I said in the astrological piece of this video, is not opposite Jupiter in Aries yet. So the retrograde influence of Saturn is occurring at a different time to when the retrograde influence on Jupiter will occur, which will happen more when the Sun gets to Leo in this example. So you can see that when Jupiter and Saturn are together in the sky as they are right now, we get them retrograding at the same time. So we get retrograde influence of these two together rather than separately, as is mostly the case. So yes, I've described to you what Jupiter retrograde looks like in his own energy. We've described what Saturn retrograde looks like in his own energy. But right now, these energies are combining, these retrograde motions, the energies are mixing up in the cauldron of, celestial energy. So what this might mean for us with this conjunction of retrograding motion is that we might have work issues. Yes, Saturn's issues and concerns around areas of work and social status and achievement and authority. We might have ill-defined boundaries, ill-defined rules and restrictions that are imposed upon us from the external sources, as well as our own internally ill-defined boundaries, not being able to put the appropriate boundaries and discipline in place and rules in place. But at the same time, we're being asked to focus inward into ourselves. The outer world is no longer going to be satisfying. Because we have this, perhaps a depression about our work, or we're feeling low about our work, or the external circumstances of our lives, perhaps because we're feeling restricted and held down, or that the boundaries are undefined, we're now going to be doing the Jupiter stuff, looking inward at, what do we really want? What do we really believe? What is my happiness? Where does my happiness come from? And Jupiter introspective work around that is going to be the result that comes out of this Saturn retrograde period and Jupiter retrograde period. And we're going to be looking now more at faith, at belief, at spirit, looking beyond these external things that are represented by Saturn. Saturn represents, remember, the external reality here on Earth, and Jupiter retrograde is going to force us into looking beyond those things. What is meaningful to us now? So these two energies are going to serve to, I believe, help one another to cause us to find an answer, a solution that's bigger than what we've experienced so far this year. And I think that's really an important thing. I think this is going to be a very big catalyst for societal change that's occurring now. Jupiter, Saturn retrograding at the same time. These two interpersonal planets, their energies are strong. They're at their closest point to the Earth when they're retrograde. We are feeling this powerfully until September. And so a big catalyst for change. This is precious. This is exciting to me. This is deep societal and personal alchemy. I believe we have the chance through this retrograde period to turn lead into gold. And haven't we had a lead experience of energies so far this year? It's been hard, it's been heavy, it's been difficult, it's been challenging, it's been quite confusing as well, like what's going to happen next. And we've got people arguing about their belief systems on social media and actually totally missing the point, totally missing the truth. Look, I could go on and on, but I won't. This is a chance, I feel, under this energy to see societal and personal change at a brand new level. And don't forget to keep in mind that this influence is beginning under the energy of Alatar, the higher powers that are out there in the universe, watching over what's happening right now on planet Earth. Well, what about you personally? How is this shift that's occurring this week going to be influencing you? Let's explore it. And we might make a start with a completely different sign than usual, just because I like to mix it up and because I like to spread the joy around. So let's maybe start with Leo. Leo rising people. Okay, so if we're starting with Leo rising people, then Saturn is retrograding in your 7th house and Jupiter is retrograding into your 6th house. What I'm going to do, I should have said this a moment ago, but I'm going to focus on the 6th house particularly, because that is where the majority of this energy for the next 4 to 5 months is going to play out. In this case, Leo's 6th house in Capricorn. So Saturn's going to move back in here, very soon, and we're going to get the full effects of this energy combining in the 6th house. So I'm going to be focusing there. So this is where there might be some vagueness about limitations, vagueness about restrictions, no limits, no boundaries. And of course, sixth house might be with enemies, with people who, are out to get you, or perhaps at work, in your daily work. This is Leo. People will experience sort of this lack of boundaries, lack of not knowing what the rules are now, and so on. Regarding work, it could also be health, your health and your ability to, your diet, your exercise sort of has no boundaries. One morning you're up at 6 going for a power walk, and then the next morning you don't get out of bed till 11. So there's no boundaries on your daily routine. There's no rules about your daily routine, and that feels like, whoa, what's going on here? And there's no discipline there. Daily routine, health, diet, enemies, also the house of sometimes conflicts as well. So you're boundaryless with conflict. We can also see sometimes that this is the house of our imbalances. So there's no boundaries, or there's too many boundaries on the imbalances in your life. Maybe you've had health issues or something, and you're feeling like now the boundaries are just closing in and restricting you. Maybe you can't leave the house because of your health issues, and you're feeling like you're suffocating. There's too many restrictions. It's over the top. It's the limitations are too great. Remember, Saturn retrograde is that boundaries become an issue, too much and too little, either way. There's also the remedy, if you want to call it that, or the Jupiterian influence in the sixth house might be now the ability to restore and alchemize this area of life through seeing the big picture, turning this lead experience into gold, making it work for you, making it powerful for you. So you might find that you get a bigger perspective on the role that this health issue has played in your life. For example, you might suddenly see, Jupiter has a very philosophical approach, and you might see some deep psychological issue that's actually been the cause of your physical problem now. The light can be shone, the truth can be revealed. Remember, you've also got Pluto retrograding here as well. So the truth can be revealed now around some health issue or dietary issue, or some sort of exercise routine, or issue with a work colleague, or difficulties at work, or problems with enemies and arguments, divorces and things like that. These sorts of things the truth can be revealed now, and you can alchemize these experiences. You can turn the mud of this experience, the muck of this experience, into gold as you discover the truth, as the truth is revealed, and you up level beyond it. So that's what we're seeing for the next week with these planets, Jupiter and Saturn turning retrograde, but it also is going to last until September. Keep that in mind. All right, so Virgo rising people, get that fellow straight there. For you guys, this energy is going to mostly play out for you in the fifth house over the next 4 to 5 months. So I'm going to focus on fifth house energy for you, where this is unfolding. So this is the realm of life where things could be a little bit vague, where you might, when I say vague, I mean the boundaries, the limitations, the rules, the expectations. You don't know what they are. Sometimes they're too claustrophobic. Sometimes they're just way out there and you overextend yourself. And it's to do with children. It's to do with lovers. It's to do with your hobbies and your joys and your happiness and what you get pleasure out of in life. This is fifth house energy. And so it's here that when Saturn goes retrograding, he's going to start in your sixth house but move into the fifth house, that you might feel that there's no limits with children. Like the children, like you're homeschooling them at the moment and they're going bonkers, there's no limits, no boundaries, and you're just doing your head in trying to manage, trying to have good systems in place, because Saturn sort of takes that away. No limits, no boundaries. Or the limits and boundaries are too much, You're limited with your children because they can't go to school. So there's this restriction on them, and then, there's limits and boundaries there. But Jupiter is here retrograding through this realm of the chart to teach you to look at the big picture perspective and to alchemize this situation. What can you learn through this? What new worldview can you garner from these experiences with children and with lovers and with your hobbies and so forth? Maybe you've discovered a new hobby during this time, and you can actually use that new hobby to change your life in some way, to redirect your focus, and you've discovered your new happiness, your new joy. Jupiter retrograde can bring you that epiphany, and you're like, I want to use this new hobby to help me in life, to serve me in my purpose. And you can get a much bigger perspective on who you really are, what your happiness is. This is the house of happiness, where your happiness comes from, what turns you on, what lights you up, what sparks your fire. So there is that chance now to alchemize that, to turn lead into gold, to sort of let the lotus flower bloom out of the mud during Jupiter retrograde in the 5th house for you. The planet Pluto is also retrograding through this realm of the chart, so he's shining a light on the truth. What is truth regarding children? What is truth regarding lovers? What is truth for you regarding your hobbies and interests and what gives you pleasure? You're going to know the truth, and you can alchemize your life to bring that into flower for you. So Virgo rising to Libra rising. Okay, so we're seeing the majority of the time these planets are retrograding. They're going to be retrograding for you in the 4th house. So I'm going to focus this talk on that realm for you right now. We're going to see Saturn retrograding through the 4th house. So when Saturn is retrograde, there's some difficulties with boundaries. And so there's going to be difficulties with boundaries with the maternal line, with the family line, with the family influence. Perhaps also difficulties with land and property as well. There could be restrictions with regard to rules and regulations in those things. Too many restrictions or too little restrictions. Too much discipline, too little discipline. So you could have a family member, say a mother or a mother-in-law or something, just crossing the line all the time, intruding into your life because, somehow you're not able to put appropriate boundaries in place with whoever that person happens to be. So there's no boundaries, or maybe there's too many boundaries and restrictions, and you're longing to go and visit your mother and you can't because, whatever the restrictions might be on your life. Saturn is going to give restrictions and that are either too much or too little to the realm of family, something to do with land and property, something to do, with perhaps our own family as well. Our children, our parenting can also be influenced by this. Not enough boundaries, not enough restriction, and things are going haywire. So Saturn retrograde can do that. But Jupiter retrograding in the same spot is going to help us to see the big picture out of this. Pluto retrograde will shine a light on what is truth here and enable us to take our power back. And Jupiter retrograding is going, is going to help us to alchemize this experience, to see it for what it is, and to see the truth that's there and change. Take this as an opportunity to bring us to our greater fulfillment, our greater destiny. So, for example, you're going crazy with the kids, and there's no limits or no boundaries on, they're not at school now, they're at home and they're hanging from the chandeliers. And so you realize, through this experience, what family means to you, or you might realize what the school system actually means to you, for good or for ill. And you might change your life because of your realization, your new worldview, Jupiter retrograde, your new understanding. You can turn this leaded experience into gold, something more meaningful for you, something more valuable for you in the future, to do with family, to do with land and property, to do with your heritage, your roots and your lineage, very 4th house energy. So use this time to look for the bigger truth, the bigger energy that is more meaningful at a deep soul core level, spiritual level for you, out of all the muck and mire of the change that we're experiencing right now. And for you guys, it's going to be connected to family, heritage, roots, lineage, etc. Now, for Scorpio rising people, this energy of the retrograding planets is mostly going to be felt for you in the third house. So I'm not going to talk about Saturn in the Aquarius retrograding. I'm actually referring more to when he's moving into Capricorn and what energy that's going to bring. The reason I'm doing that, I know Scorpio people, you like a lot of depth and a lot of information, but if I was to do both houses for you, this reading would go for nearly 3 hours. So I'm just focusing on a singular house. So Saturn retrograding through the third house of your chart can indicate a lack of boundaries, or too many boundaries, too many rules, or too little rules. Either polaric extreme is often seen with a retrograde planet, in this case Saturn, regarding third house things. So no limits with siblings, they're always in your face and they don't know when enough's enough, or there's too many restrictions with siblings, third house of siblings, so you're not seeing them as much as you would usually want to do because of some circumstance in your life. There's either too many boundaries, or boundaries are an issue with regard to advertising, marketing, trade, maybe a small business. Small businesses have really suffered over this year. Honestly, I just can't get over, don't get me started, but how unfair this has been to small business, whereas big businesses have, they're allowed to keep trading and what have you, and small businesses have been scratching, certainly here in Australia, and it's very disturbing. But for Scorpio people, Scorpio rising sun or moon people, this Saturn retrograding in the third house can mean issues with small business. Like, what are the, you're vague about the boundaries, or what are the new limits, what are the new rules, what are the new restrictions, and there's a confusion there, or a lack of understanding there, maybe too many restrictions that just keep inhibiting your ability to run your small business or your trade or your e-commerce or advertising or your marketing, or maybe too many restrictions or too little restrictions in those realms. So that's what Saturn, when he's retrograding, can do in that realm of our life, usually, and will be instigated by government authorities in Capricorn. But Jupiter is retrograding at the same time, which is causing you to look beyond the external circumstances at what is the truth here. What is real here? What is actually more important here? What is your joy? Where's the joy coming from in life? So, for example, you might have struggled as a small business to have to work with these new rules and regulations, and you're not clear about them because nobody's clear about what actually is happening and what's not happening, and you actually look beyond the big picture, beyond the circumstances that your small business is in, and you start to think, well, does my happiness and joy actually come from having that shop down in the mall? Maybe I should just go online with what I'm doing, get a big warehouse and start doing online selling. Maybe I'd be more happy there. And you start to look at things and examine the truth and find, look at a much more big picture approach that could see you having more joy in the future. Jupiter retrograde is alchemy. It is taking the lead and turning it into gold. So what is the opportunity that's there for your advertising, marketing, small business, with your siblings, that's sitting there in Jupiter retrograde season, waiting to be revealed, so that you can be like the lotus flower that blooms out of the mud of this 2020 experience? Jupiter retrograde is a very key time for seeing the big picture and for alchemizing the difficult situations that we might find ourselves in. So that's for you, Scorpio rising people. For Sagittarius rising people, well, we're seeing this energy mostly for the next few months. It's mostly going to be happening here in the second house. So I'm going to talk about second house influences. Saturn is turning retrograde in your third house, yes, but if I was to talk about both houses for each sign, this video would be about 3 hours long. So I'm just limiting it to the influence of the retrograde motions of the planets over the next few months. And for you, that's going to be happening mostly in your second house. So the second house is where you'll notice restriction and blockage of, not not really restriction and blockage, but vagueness regarding boundaries and rules and limitations. What are the limitations? What are the restrictions? It's like it's not clear. There might be too many limitations and restrictions and boundaries on your life right now, and you're feeling claustrophobic because of it. There might be not enough restrictions and boundaries on your life right now, and just things you don't know where you stand. It's too free. It's too I don't know what's going on here. What can I or can't I do? And this is connecting to second house things, your resources, your money. You mightn't have, do be careful if this is you guys, to put as much as you're able to appropriate restrictions and boundaries in your life with money. Okay, say, right, I'm not going to commit any more than XYZ amount to my new investments on the stock exchange. You've got to actively try under Saturn retrograde influence to put appropriate boundaries in place, but it's not going to be easy, because Saturn retrograde sort of removes the boundaries, and you want to watch out also for too much spending. Not stopping to think about where you spend your money. And then suddenly you go to your bank account and there's no money to buy the bread and the milk, So you've got to be very careful under Saturn retrograding in your second house that you have the appropriate structures in place to not lose everything. I'm not saying you're going to lose everything, but we limit our boundaries, our usual boundaries with money. They go by the by during this season, Saturn retrograding in the second house. So no limits with money and resources, or too many limitations on our resources. We're stretched, we're having to sort of scratch for to provide the resources that we might ordinarily need. Now that's the Saturn energy through this second house. The second house, I might add, is also, and this is how it might manifest for many people, our self-worth and self-value. We might not actually see our own self-worth. Suddenly, we have no parameters on our self-worth and self-value. Our value system comes under the influence of the no boundary Saturn retrograde. So, we might have this idea, Saturn is work, that you have to work hard for what you get. You have to bust a gut to the point of exhaustion for what you get. That might be your value system regarding earning money. And, that indicates, there's no boundaries to how hard you might believe that you have to work. There might be too many restrictions on, your beliefs or your values around work, where you're feeling like in order to earn the money to live, you've got to succumb to the, having to work long hours and work hard. You have to be the one to provide for the family, and the burden falls all on your shoulders. These are the resources that we need for life and for living, to get through our everyday experience. We look to the second house at, money, food, clothing, shelter, blah, 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 the resources we need for life. And in some way, Saturn retrograding can make your value be that, you might value hard work, or you might have a belief even that you need to be the one that provides everything, and the burden is squarely on your shoulders. Saturn is burdens. So there is this issue regarding your values and work that is now boundaryless, or there's too many boundaries and too much discipline on you regarding your value for work, and that can be exhausting. So do be careful right now, if you're Sagittarius rising, with either of the ways this could possibly manifest. With your self-worth, you might only, like I said, value yourself if you can work hard and provide for the family right now. So if this is you and you're Sagittarius rising, sun or moon, then watch what you're putting your value in. Is it too much? Are you going to extremes with regard to what you consider valuable in terms of work? And also watch your resources. What are the boundaries like? Is it too boundaryless, or are you putting too much restriction on yourself and penny pinching that's perhaps not necessary? Watch for extremes in the boundaries that you're putting on this realm of your life. Also, I would just want to point out, though, and this is the exciting bit, is that Jupiter is retrograding in your second house. So this is where we can alchemize our life. And by that, I mean we can turn lead into gold. Second house things are where we can be, in a sense, reborn. But really, Jupiter looks for opportunities. And Jupiter looks for chances to change something out of these difficult circumstances that you might find yourself in. So out of perhaps, let's say, this period of, oh, I've got to work hard if I'm going to put bread on the table, you might see an opportunity for some new way to put bread on the table that's actually going to be more fulfilling and more in line with what is truly your happiness, and you can make a change. So it's out of the stress that's created through Saturn retrograding period that the lotus is born out of the mud and blossoms out of the mud. So alchemy regarding how you are putting food on the table and clothes in the cupboard and petrol in the car, this is what we can see through this period for you guys. And so that is actually quite exciting, the alchemization of the second house. You'll know the truth, you'll see the truth. Jupiter will be revealing the truth, and you'll see what is true for you in a big picture perspective that has a very spiritualized approach now. It's not going to be so much about, oh, I've got to have the latest Ferrari in the driveway. No, it's going to be much more about what is meaningful to me, what is purposeful here, what is the higher calling of my life with my resources that I have for living. And you'll be able to start alchemizing to actually achieve what you want with happiness. That's what we're getting out of this, is the chance at the end of this whole period to be more in line with accumulating stuff, making money in a way that brings us pure joy. So lots to look forward to, but a few sticky kind of issues with boundaries to go through first. Okay, so that's Sagittarius. Now Capricorn rising people, or sun or moon. Well, most of this energy is going to be falling in your first house. And I am going to be talking about the majority of the retrograde planets in the first house. If I was to talk about, and I'll just get my pointer here. If I was to talk about Saturn retrograding in Aquarius and then going retrograde into Capricorn, along with Jupiter retrograding in Capricorn, if I did that for every sign, I'd be here for 3 hours. So I'm limiting this review actually to the first house alone, just to make sure it's not the Astro Weather Report from hell. Okay, so you're going to be having over the next few months Saturn retrograding into the first house, and so Saturn retrograde indicates restrictions, blockages regarding boundaries. So there's no boundaries, or there's too many boundaries, no rules, too many rules, no discipline or too much discipline, nothing in between. It's the extreme with this energy. Saturn's at its closest point to us right now, and therefore we feel this energy very, very profoundly, very strongly. So what's going on here is that in your life you might be assuming too many responsibilities, too many duties, too little ability, essentially, to put boundaries in place and say, look, no, I can't take on more work. I'm already up to midnight every night trying to get everything done. And, I just can't do anymore. It's like under Saturn retrograde, you just don't have the willpower or the capacity within you to set appropriate boundaries for your life. So you take on too much responsibility, too much duty, too much work under Saturn retrograde through this portion of your chart. So there might be, too little boundaries regarding that, or too many boundaries where you're feeling like hampered, or too many rules, too many regulations, too much work. You're feeling overwhelmed and by your responsibilities, overwhelmed by your duties, because it's just too many of them, too much duty, too much responsibility right now. So that's Saturn retrograding through the first house, and your life journey can just feel weighted during this retrograde period where everything feels heavy, everything feels too much, everything feels hard, but there is there is a beautiful message despite this difficulty for you Capricorn rising people. And that is that Jupiter is retrograding through your sign as well. And wherever Jupiter retrogrades, it's actually the energy of what we call alchemy, the capacity to turn lead into gold, the capacity for the lotus blossom to bloom out of the mud. And so for you guys, this difficulty that Saturn is bringing into your life gives you the opportunity to change, to alchemize this and to say, for example, I am going to put new boundaries in my life, or rather, Jupiter energy is to see the big picture, to see what's really happening, what the truth is here. Oh, you're taking advantage of me and you're asking too much of me because I haven't been able to say no in the past. And you see the truth. And so therefore you make the big picture changes. You know what? I need to honor myself more. I need to respect myself more. This is the house of self, the first house. And I need to say enough's enough. So it's out of this challenge to your boundaries, Saturn retrograding in the first house, challenges to your boundaries, that you see the big picture and you say, no more mud, no more lead in my life. Now I want the gold. Now I want the lotus blossom. So you, through this experience, can see the opportunity for change. And I hope everybody takes it. And out of this retrograde period, you learn to put the appropriate boundaries in place with other people so that you're not exploited anymore, so that you're not taken advantage of anymore, so that you can stand on your own 2 feet in your own truth and live the life that makes you happy. Jupiter in the first house, your happiness is the theme. So for you guys, it could be very empowering for your whole life journey, this retrograde season for you. Aquarius rising people, well, for the beginning of this retrograde period, Saturn will be in your first house, but really what I want to focus on is Saturn and Jupiter's retrograding through your 12th house. And the reason I'm going to do that is if I was to talk about Saturn retrograding through your first and through the 12th, as well as Jupiter retrograding through the 12th, I'd be here for 3 hours and nobody would watch the video. So I'm just focusing on the period of this retrograde season, Jupiter Saturn, when it's going to be moving through your 12th house. So during this time, this is when Saturn retrograding through your 12th house is going to cause no boundaries. That's what Saturn retrograde brings. No boundaries, or a lack of boundaries, or too many boundaries. The polaric extreme of too much Saturn energy. It's very close to the Earth at this point, and so we're getting the heightened Saturn energy, which can, when it's retrograding, results in the restrictions and the blockages are just over the top and too much. We feel hemmed in, we feel we can't breathe, or there's just a vagueness about what is the limitations here? What are the boundaries? What are the rules? I don't know. What could I extend myself to go this far? And you just have the sort of no concept of boundaries. You probably will be quite driven to isolate. It's not that there's a fear here, but although Saturn does represent fear, but the 12th house is quite boundaryless as well. It dissolves boundaries. So for you guys, more than any other sign, the boundaries, I think, are going to be removed. It's not about being hemmed in for you guys. It's about being too little boundaries, too little understanding of the rules. And although Aquarius might like that energy, it can prove difficulty with authority figures. It can prove difficult with sort of a sensation of I'm being abandoned. Who's here to help me? Who's supporting me right now? Authority figures is Saturn. Having no boundaries, having no rules, no regulations. Well, where's the support coming from? Where's the parameters? There's nothing there. So there's this feeling of I'm on my own here. I'm abandoned. What's happening to the community? So it's not an easy one to carry, but on the plus side, you might find that you are connected very strongly to the divine. When the boundaries dissolve in the 12th house, well, suddenly we get these amazing dreams that occur for us at night. So write down your dreams. We get spiritual insights like never before. Our psychic attunement is really up to full blast. So pay attention to omens, pay attention to the psychic realms under this influence, because you're probably likely to get many messages from spirit during Saturn retrograding in your 12th house. Trust that. But Jupiter here is going to help you alchemize whatever this experience looks like for you. So you might find that Jupiter retrograding here, it's going to help you to see the bigger picture, to see the truth regarding your spiritual life. This is a house of spiritual life, a house of creativity. And you'll be able to alchemize that, you're through this experience of Saturn retrograding. Let's say you have a lot more psychic downloads and insights to spiritual wisdom because there's no more blockages, no more restrictions here. So you get these insights and spiritual wisdom. And because of that, Jupiter, which is very introspective at this time and looking at the big picture and not concerned with material reality, but much more focused on our inner dimension, suddenly your whole spiritual world expands and it will never be the same again. And you see the truth, and you see empowerment, and you are liberated, and you're set free, and you find your happiness, your spiritual happiness now. Under this influence of the retrogrades in your 12th house, you could find that your whole spiritual approach to life is transformed and renewed. This is alchemy in the house of spirit, alchemy in the house of higher consciousness, alchemy in the house of karma too. So you can expect karmic wounds and issues to be dissolved now. Saturn, planet of karma, in the house of karma, retrograding. Jupiter, the big picture, the alchemy that changes the future for you. So of all the signs, and I know you Aquarius people have been through hell, but of all the signs, this is the one where we have the capacity to see the biggest transformation at a soul and awakening level for you. We'll find a lot of Aquarian people really coming alive spiritually now, really waking up spiritually over the next couple of months, being ushered into a whole new spiritual understanding like never before. So you guys have a great capacity to change the world, I might add. Through all you've been through and all the muck that you've pushed through over the last couple of years, it's you Aquarian people who now, under this influence, have the chance to let the lotus flower blossom out of the mud, to let the lead turn into gold, with Jupiter retrograding in your 12th house of spiritual understanding. Might be a good time to sort of, go and isolate in some way at an ashram or a monastery, or even just a 5-star retreat for a week or something, and just go into spirit and do the self-searching, looking at the bigger perspective on things and reaching your truth. Jupiter retrograding in the 12th house. Powerful. So I'm excited and happy to share that for you guys. This is a precious time. So I've done Capricorn rising, Pisces rising, people. Well, this energy of retrograde motion for you guys is occurring in the 11th house. So I'm going to be focusing on the 11th house only. Yes, I know that Saturn's beginning his retrograde period in your 12th house, but if I was to talk for each sign about the influence of Saturn retrograding in the 12th house and then going into the 11th house along with Jupiter retrograding in the 11th house, we'd be here for 3 hours and nobody would ever watch this video. So I'm going to focus instead on the period of this retrograde season that is all about the 11th house energy. So Saturn is in retrograde motion is about losing boundaries, having no restrictions, having no limits that can be of detriment to our life. And so in the 11th house, we might have no boundaries with friends. We might find friends are just crossing the line. We might find social groups are starting to really be critical of us and step into our territory emotionally that causes us harm. Social media, is sometimes attributed to the 11th house. Anything on the internet is very 11th house. It's a system, and the social media system is 11th house in that sense. And of course, where have we seen a lot of people really crossing the line with their opinions, with their criticism, with their abuse? it's online, it's out of control. And of course, the sensitivity of Pisces can be very hurt by that. But there seems to be no restrictions, no limits on people in that realm at the moment. And they're just, keyboard warriors everywhere. So this is the energy of Saturn retrograding at the moment through, well, it's not retrograding just yet, but we might feel it more when he retrogrades through your 11th house. Social groups, networks, friendships that just cross the line and seem to have no boundaries right now. Well, there might be no boundaries, and this is in the positive sense, to your visions and goals and dreams, I might add, Piscean people. So enjoy that. You guys are particularly brilliant at envisioning utopian futures or idealized ways the world could be. I'd encourage you to do that now, because there will be no limits on your dreams and visions. Night dreams, etc., are seen by the 12th house, but daydreams, what could I do if I did this, and wouldn't the world be great if we were all in Epicurean societies, and da 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 da. You go off on your visualizations and your dreams and your aspirations. That's 11th house. So 11th house retrograde Saturn is going to remove boundaries in your ability to plan and dream and scheme and visualize and have goals. So enjoy that. That will be the more positive component to Saturn retrograding with limited boundaries or lessening boundaries in your 11th house. Not only that, but Jupiter will be retrograding through your 11th house too. And wherever Jupiter retrogrades, this is where we get alchemy. So it's in these visions and goals and dreams that you can actually see the lotus flower emerge out of the mud. Maybe you've had a vision or a goal for many years to have a self-sufficient farm somewhere, and you've battled and you've strived and you've worked hard to bring that into being and make that manifest, and you're exhausted and it just feels like everything's gone to mud with your vision, your goal, your dream. And it's in looking at the bigger picture, seeing the opportunities, seeing the potential that for some new way of generating that opportunity, that money, that income to create that dream, that goal, that you can see the mud cause a lotus blossom to emerge, that you can see the gold coming out of the lead, that you have the capacity to do that, to get that self-sufficient farm happening in your life through some wonderful opportunity that you now have the big picture perspective to see through Jupiter retrograding in the house of visions and goals and dreams, seeing the big picture, seeing the spiritual potential that is available to you. Alchemy in the house of visions and goals and dreams. That not only that, alchemy with friendships. So during this time when there might be friends crossing the line, you don't have boundaries with friends or groups or, social networks and so on, and you're feeling violated by this perhaps, through this difficult experience, this lead experience, this mud experience, you might see the truth. Well, you know what? These people aren't worth my time if that's the way they're going to treat me. And so you might see the big picture perspective and say, I don't need that anymore. And you make the spiritual adjustment to your life to not be affected any longer by their behavior, or not to feel that you need to be friends with these people who don't have your best interests at heart. So you can see alchemy out of a difficult, confronting situation. Alchemy happens, and suddenly you move into a space where you just delete everybody who's abusive to you off your Facebook page or whatever, and you're into the gold, because all that's left is the purity, not the lead, not the people who are dragging you down and weighing you down in life, but all that's left is the pure gold, the people who are pure gold, the friends, the social groups, the networks, the connections, the systems in your life that are the gold. So it is out of this difficult experience, Saturn retrograde, no boundaries, no rules, no limits, that you can see transformation occur that changes things into gold or a lotus blossom out of the mud. Okay, so Aries rising people, this energy is falling in This energy is falling in your 10th house, and I'm only focusing on the 10th house. Yes, I know Saturn is retrograding initially through your 11th house, but if I was to talk about Saturn retrograde through 11th, then through the 10th, and Jupiter retrograding in the 10th, this video would be 3 hours long and nobody would watch it. So I'm focusing only for this retrograde season on the energy that's falling in just the 10th house. Jupiter, well, let's start with Saturn actually. Saturn retrograde means there's a lack of boundaries, no boundaries. And so you might find that during Saturn retrograding through your 10th house, that bosses seem to have no boundaries. They're crossing the line all the time. They are asking too much of you. They're putting too much pressure on you. They are, not respecting your personal needs. And so bosses can be boundaryless now with their demands and so on, and that can be exhausting. Saturn retrograde in the 10th house. There can be a lack of boundaries with your career or your legacy that you're creating in general. It can even be self-instigated. Usually we see authority figures instigating things in the 10th house, but it even can be self-instigated where you are putting too much pressure on yourself to achieve right now, to have social status, and you've got no boundaries with what you're willing to do to achieve that social status, and that can be detrimental in the long run. You can burn yourself out. You can do things that you later regret in order to achieve a sort of sense of social status and influence. No boundaries with authority figures, no boundaries with achievement, no boundaries with career success. You're just pushing things to the limit that may be very confronting for you in the long term. The alchemy that's available for you, though, comes from Jupiter retrograding in the 10th house. And because of this beautiful Jupiter retrograde that's going to be occurring, you're actually going to have the capacity to see the big picture. So if that boss is just putting too many demands on you and expectations from you, Jupiter retrograde is going to give you the eyes to see the truth of this. You know what? They're exploiting me. They're taking advantage of me. I'm going to do something about this. You will have a bigger picture perspective. You'll also have a more spiritual approach and be looking for what's meaningful for you in terms of the legacy you want to leave. 10th house is a legacy we want to leave. So you'll be looking for the meaning, the truth here. Well, this boss putting the thumb on me all the time, is this really where I'm meant to be? Is this really what I want to achieve? Big picture perspective might say no. Big picture perspective might say, well, you know what? I'm going to go for a different role because I can't handle working for this person anymore. They just keep using me. So Jupiter gives you the eyes to see from a big picture perspective about what is truth for you, what is happiness for you regarding the legacy that you're creating, regarding the career that you're wanting to build. And it's when we can see this big picture perspective and we can see the opportunities that truly are available to us out there, Jupiter retrograde, that we can turn lead into gold. This is the alchemy, where we can change a crappy situation, and turn it into something really beneficial. Jupiter retrograde. It's like the lotus blossom that blooms out of the mud. You're in this muddy situation in some way with career or with the legacy that you're building, and something's not working quite right and it's not gelling for you, and you find the answer and you transform that mucky situation into something of benefit and beauty for your life. So Jupiter gives you the potential to do that in the realm of authority figures, career, legacy, throughout this retrograde period until September. So for Taurus rising people, there we go. Well, this energy is falling in the 9th house. Now, I wanted to just point out that I'm only going to talk about the 9th house retrograde planets, simply because if I was to talk about Saturn going retrograde firstly in Aquarius, then going retrograde in Capricorn, and Jupiter retrograding in Capricorn, and if I did that for every sign, yawn, it would be a 3-hour video. Nobody would watch it. So I'm just focusing on the 9th house energy that's going to be playing out for you during this retrograde period of Jupiter-Saturn until September. So Saturn will end up retrograding through your 9th house, and Saturn's retrograde means no boundaries or vague boundaries or no rules, no restrictions, and you just don't know when to say no or enough's enough, and there's too much coming at you because you haven't got boundaries in place. So Saturn in the ninth house might mean that you don't have appropriate boundaries in place, or they dissolve or something, with not authority figures, with inspirational figures, with gurus and teachers. Maybe you're just believing everything they tell you and not analyzing with astuteness and wisdom. Well, what, they've said this. Is that really true? Is that really to be trusted? The ninth house energy is a very lucky house, the luckiest house in the horoscope, but it's also connected in its shadow side to the preachy people, the zealots, the dogmatic energy of religion. So, excuse me. So for Taurus rising people, there might be an experience with no boundaries, like, people crossing the line with their dogma and their zealous beliefs that they're just trying to put on you. Belief systems is ninth house. And so you have confrontations maybe with spiritual people, or religious people, probably more so. And you just go through this experience of them just not knowing when enough's enough, or not, you're sitting on the train and some preachy person comes along and tries to give you a tract, and you're like, no, and they're like, oh, and they just won't leave you alone, and they're yapping in your ear, and they're just going hell for leather with it. And so experiences like that where there's a seeming boundarylessness regarding the beliefs of others and how they're putting it on you. Or your experiences with inspirational people as well, where you're not, your ability to astutely and objectively assess what they're trying to teach you is just gone. Also, no boundaries might exist with cultural influences, and you're getting bombarded by different cultural influences all the time, and you don't know what's true. Let's say you're into astrology, and you're looking, on one hand, you've done a course in Babylonian astrology, and then you look at Egyptian astrology, and then you've actually taken on some cosmobiology as well, and then Uranian astrology, and looking at the comparative nature of those two, and it's like just too much higher learning, no boundaries, no restrictions with what you're taking in, and it's overload, and it's, oh my God, I can't, and suddenly you start getting mucked up in your head about what it is you actually have learnt and what cross-references to here and there, because there's been no boundaries with your higher learning, there's been no boundaries with your taking in of knowledge. So these are some of the challenges of a boundaryless Saturn in retrograding through the ninth house. But the gold in this, the blessing in this, is that Jupiter is retrograding. And when Jupiter retrogrades, he's the alchemist. When he's in retrograde motion, he can turn lead into gold. And it's out of this big situation that you might find yourself in that suddenly you can see the solution and the truth and the reality beyond the circumstances. So it's like the lotus flower blooming out of the mud, or lead being turned into gold, alchemy. So what we see then might be that through, let's use the example of too many different astrological schools of thought coming in and confusing the hell out of you, you actually step back with Jupiter retrograde. You see, you know what? I really align with evolutionary astrology. That is the jam. That's the stuff. And you can, learn to leave all other schools of thought behind and move solely into one direction that aligns with you spiritually and philosophically in the ninth house. And all that mess, all that mud that was confusion and no boundaries and too much, suddenly turns into an enlightenment and a path that you want to follow to understand, and you go into this new realm of learning that's much more, after this retrograde season is over, has boundaries, has limitations, has direction in what you want to learn about. Similarly, you can see, you step back with that preachy zealot person who's just crossing the line with their belief systems, and you can step back and you can turn that situation into gold. You can see the truth about religion. You can see the reality about religion, because that yucky mucky experience that you had with that person on the train who wouldn't shut up. You step back and you can suddenly see, well, hey, Christian fanaticism, it's actually the same as Muslim fanaticism. They're both as brainwashed as each other. And you step back and you see the truth, and out of that knowledge, that experience, that yucky experience, comes a realization that turns lead into gold regarding your beliefs or your knowledge or your inspiration. There can be a turning of lead into gold with a regard to sort of inspirational figures as well, that comes out of the confusion, that comes out of the muck of, well, is what they say true or not? And Jupiter gives you the ability, retrograde, to look beyond the circumstances and see the reality, the truth, the spiritual perspective that will give you the alchemy in spiritual matters, cultural matters, with mentors and inspirational figures, and faith and belief. So exciting times for you guys. You're going to be stepping into more truth, which I think is really exciting. Gemini rising people. There we are. Well, Saturn and Jupiter are retrograding through your 8th house. And I will just point out that I'm only talking about the 8th house energy. I know Saturn is retrograding through your 9th house initially. But if I was to talk about Saturn retrograding in the 9th, then Saturn retrograding in the 8th, then we would be here for 3 hours and for each sign trying to cover it all, and nobody would watch the video. So I'm going to focus instead this retrograde period until September. I'm going to talk about the 8th house influence because it's going to be where most of the action occurs. So for Gemini rising people, Saturn is retrograding in the 8th house, and this is where there may feel like there are no boundaries, no limitations. So do be careful, you Gemini rising people, because when we are lacking in boundaries or experiencing a transit where the boundaries are lessened in our life, in the 8th house, what is the 8th house? It's connected to the underworld. It's connected to crime. It's connected to secrets. It's connected to, on the better side, occult practices and other dimensions. So let's go with the good stuff. There might be a lessening of boundaries between yourself and other dimensions, and you might be able to experience higher levels of consciousness or messages from the divine or energetic healings now, because there's no boundaries and blockages restricting that happening in your life. So it's a good time to get Reiki or energy healing. It's a good time to have a channeling session. It's a good time to do some psychic practices under this no boundaries energy of Saturn retrograding through this house in your horoscope. So that can bring you more wisdom, more insight, more mystical understandings that you may never have had up until this point. So enjoy Saturn retrograding through that part of your house, your chart. But on the negative side, do watch out, as I was about to say before, do watch out for criminal activity, because there can be no boundaries with people breaking into your home and, doing what you don't want them to do. So, make sure, if this was me, I would look at, okay, have I got all my locks working properly? Do I lock my door when I leave home? Am I locking my car when it's sitting in my garage? Just those little, being cautious, being careful, so that people can't cross those boundaries with your stuff, with your things, because 8th house has to do with the criminal activity. So, that would be a word to the wise there. However, Jupiter is going to be retrograding through your 8th house as well. And what does Jupiter bring? Well, he brings alchemy when he is retrograde. He gives the capacity to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, to turn lead into gold, to see the lotus flower bloom out of the mud. And it's in the 8th house realm that you have the capacity to experience this. Very, very exciting. And of course, it's through a bigger perspective. It's through not getting bogged down in the circumstances, but seeing beyond it. Very Jupiter retrograde. Seeing beyond the circumstances to the spiritual truth, the philosophical truth that's really at play here. So you get connection, let's say, to divine energies or other realms or something, and you get a message from spirit, and your mystical psychic powers go off the Richter scale, and you can look at this period, this experience with Jupiter eyes and sort of see the truth, Wow, I never knew that esoteric practices could be so empowering, and I'm going to actually move more into that now. And you change your life. You turn sort of a lack of knowledge into powerful knowledge through taking a big picture perspective. But particularly we notice the alchemy when there's a crap situation. So you might have a difficult encounter with somebody who's from the underworld, from the mafia, or somebody who is a swindler or something like that, and you have a difficult encounter, no boundaries with people of that nature. And it's out of that messy, mucky, lead-heavy experience that you get a big picture perspective on what the motives of these people are, why they do what they do, and you can transform your attitudes or beliefs around those people into one of compassion or understanding that allows new insights. Also, we see that the 8th house, and for most people this probably will be the most practical example, the 8th house is taxes. And so there might be sort of some difficult experiences with taxes, or setting up of community resources, the things you've got to pay to the government and that sort of thing. So let's say you've had a very difficult experience with taxes or something, and then along comes this Jupiter retrograde that gives you a perspective on a tax situation or a will or a legacy. 8th house, other people's money, and just shared resources. You've had a difficult experience there. There've been no boundaries. Maybe somebody's taken you to court over a will and you're contesting a will or something, and there just feels like, everyone's just having a free-for-all. I want this, I want that from the will or the legacy. Or difficulty with taxes, and the government's just gone, I'll take this, I'll take that, thank you very much, and I'll leave you with nothing. So they can feel this energy of no boundaries with other people's money or shared resources. And along comes Jupiter and gives you a big picture perspective beyond the circumstances, beyond the material realm. And you can see the truth of what's really going on. And you have a higher plane view. And in some way, you're able to transform this situation of everybody grasping for their piece of the pie, with a will, or the government with taxes and things, and you can transform this into something that is actually to your advantage, that gives you opportunity. Now, I'm trying to think of a way that might play out. Nothing's coming to my mind. You might be able to leave an example below. The 8th house is also crisis situations, and that is actually the best illustration of alchemy. Out of crisis situations, we become crisis masters, people who can navigate those roller coaster hills with ease, with aplomb, like, no worries, I can handle this difficult situation, this crisis situation, because I have learned how to turn lead into gold, difficult situations to my advantage, to pull myself up by my bootstraps, to make the changes that I need in my life that take me to the next level, that don't let me stay stuck in the mud. So it's through also crisis that might come now. And we've been having a year of crisis, haven't we? That we can actually see transformation of this crisis situation, particularly in the lives of Gemini rising people, transformation of these crisis situations into being able to be a leader, a teacher, an alchemist in times of crisis and upheaval and difficulty. So lots of potential here, and please feel free to leave a note or a comment below with how you feel this is playing out for you in terms of alchemy through crisis, because I'm really interested in these stories at the moment, and certainly during Jupiter retrograde season, you Gemini rising people are going to be the ones who are experiencing the most alchemy through crisis experiences. All right, final sign. Thank you for waiting so patiently, beautiful Cancer people, to the end. I do appreciate that. There we are. And for you, well, this energy of the retrograde season of the two big influential planets, Saturn and Jupiter, is falling in your 7th house. Now, yes, I know Saturn is initially going to go retrograde in your 8th house. But if I was to talk about Saturn retrograding in the 8th, then Saturn retrograding in the 7th, and Jupiter retrograding in the 7th, for every single 12 signs, we would be here for 3 hours, and therefore nobody would watch the video. It'd be too long. People would be, yawn, bored, no way. So I'm just going to talk about the majority of this retrograde season until September is going to see Saturn and Jupiter falling in your 7th house, and that's where the influence is mostly going to be felt. So Saturn retrograde is to have no boundaries, to have restrictions and no rules, no restrictions, no blockages. To our detriment, because we do need boundaries, we do need rules, we do need to sort of know what the parameters are. And this is in relationships for you. So you can find during this Saturn retrograde season that partners are crossing the line for you. They're expecting too much from you. They're taking too much from you. This is business partners, clients, your audience, marriage partners as well, definitely in the 7th house. And they can just be sort of expecting too much, taking too much, and you're left exhausted and depleted because of Saturn retrograde. No boundaries with people, no boundaries with others. Very tiring. However, that's the caution under this Saturn retrograde influence, but the opportunity is here with Jupiter retrograding in the same spot to transform this, to step back aside from the circumstances and look at, well, what's the alchemy here? What's the opportunity in this muck? They're taking too much from me, or I'm giving too much. I don't know when to say no to these people in my life. And you step back and you look and you see, you know what? I need to put boundaries in place. I need to say, I'm not going to do that anymore. And it's through the intensity of the retrograde Saturn and the realization that, you don't know when to say no, and you are taking on too much. And those realizations of how boundaryless you are then cause you to change tactic, change perspective. So out of the muck and the difficulty and this lead experience of people expecting too much, you transform it into gold, or you transform it into a lotus blossom blooming out of the mud. And it's beautiful in that sense, because out of this retrograde period, you're going to learn how to put boundaries in place. You're going to learn to say, enough's enough. I can't do all that, and I need you to show up more. You turn the experience of lead into gold with relationships. Unfortunately, you have to go through the lead experience, the heavy experience, in order to transform it into the gold. But that's what the purpose of this retrograde phase is all about for people with strong Cancer influence in their charts. So that's what we're seeing in this whiz around the skies, what is unfolding through Jupiter and Saturn retrograde. I hope this has been helpful to you. And I always like to close with a prayer inviting the universe to enter into our lives this week. Energy of love, angels who watch over our planet, and the higher powers that are involved in this retrograde season. We thank you for your presence, and we thank you for all that you're going to teach us through this period of time on Earth. May we be good pupils. May we learn what we need to learn with joy, with high vibration, and with the curiosity that life is to be enjoyed and experienced. Help us to have a good attitude to this retrograde season. Help us to navigate it wisely. Thank you for being present during this time of difficulty on planet Earth. And please help us to rise up out of these challenges with grace, with truth, and help us to alchemize this situation in our personal lives and as a collective as a whole. And so it is. Well, thanks for joining me for this week's Astro Weather Report. I'll have another weather report for you next week. I'll catch you then.